Hello and welcome to the Arc Woman podcast. This is an exploration of womankind. Here we discuss what it is to be a woman in the modern world while utilizing ancient and modern modalities in tandem to create a bounty of health for the body, mind and spirit. Hello everyone and welcome back to the pod. Glad you're here. Today we're going to be talking about PCOS. I was looking on my podcast and I couldn't believe that even after creating so many resources, content, and having so much conversation around PCOS, I have not made a podcast episode about it. And I think making podcast episodes like this is really great for women who it isn't within their price point to be able to afford any resources that I have on PCOS, but they want to know where to start. So this is a great place if you're thinking that you have some symptoms of PCOS, if you'd like to learn about it a little bit more, how you can treat it, and a few of the roots. We can talk about a few of the roots. PCOS is a really interesting disorder because there are lots of different roots, and the constitution that women have will differ according to, her past life experience, where she's at with her insulin resistance. I mean, I could start now, but I think maybe we should just start from the top. So PCOS impacts 10% of women of childbearing age. So that's 1 in 10. So if you can imagine 10 of the women you have in your life, it's likely that one of them will have PCOS. It's a leading cause of infertility in Western countries such as the US, Canada, Australia, and European countries as well. The name is also so misleading. So PCOS, we think Polycystic Ovarian Syndrome. That's what PCOS stands for. And so I think a lot of women think, okay, I don't have cysts on my ovaries, so I can't be diagnosed with PCOS, and this couldn't be further from the truth. And that's where we can lead into a conversation around the diagnosis of PCOS. So to be diagnosed with PCOS, you need to be positive. You need to get a positive test results for 2 of these 3 things. So delayed ovulation or anovulation, so you're not ovulating. Longer cycles than 35 days or irregular cycle, so you just never know when you're getting your period. You never know when you're ovulating. Your hormone levels are all over the place. High androgens as well. So androgens are male hormones, but women need a certain amount of androgens in their system to a certain degree. Women with PCOS have really high androgens, male pattern hormones. So DHT and testosterone are the ones that we usually see in high amounts in women with PCOS. So this can be diagnosed with blood labs or just with symptoms. So acne, hair growth, so kind of like on your belly, around your nipples, excess hair growth where we usually grow hair, or hirsutism, that's also what it's called. It's a scientific name. Kind of on the chin, if you have any chin hairs or any kind of acne along your chin and jawline, that's generally what we see with high androgens. So that can be diagnosed by a doctor or a physician going, okay, yes, I see you have symptoms of hirsutism or symptoms of high androgens, or you can see in your lab work that you have high DHT, testosterone, or any other type of androgen. It can also be diagnosed with ultrasounds that show cysts on the ovaries. So generally, to be diagnosed with PCOS, or at least to be positively diagnosed with PCO, so polycystic ovaries, is 12 or more cysts on one ovary. But keep in mind as well that the amount of cysts that you have on your ovary does not mean that you have more or less severe PCOS. There's no correlation between these 2 things here. And so what I'm explaining here, the 3 criteria that we use as a diagnostic tool in the medical field and the health field to diagnose women with PCOS is called the Rotterdam criteria. And it was made in 2003. And you're probably thinking, that's a long time ago. It's like 21 years ago at this point. It's 2024. So we have had way more research on PCOS than we have had any other female reproductive issue. And when I'm talking about female reproductive issues, I'm usually talking about autoimmunity and endometriosis. Almost didn't come out of my mouth. But we have lots of research on PCOS, which is great because it means that we know how to treat it when we know how to diagnose it. So just to go over that again, so to have a positive diagnosis of PCOS, you can have 2 of the 3, which is high androgens, which is, hirsutism, hair growth. You can also have hair loss, male pattern baldness, so like losing hair on the middle of your head, kind of like a male would start balding. Acne, is also a telltale sign of high androgens. And then also, it could be low progesterone. We usually see low progesterone in lab work, high androgens in lab work. We're seeing through an ultrasound that you have more than 12 cysts on one ovary. And you also have longer cycles and ovulation and delayed ovulation. Okay? Keep in mind as well that 25% of women who have polycystic ovaries without PCOS. So the reason why this is because we developed 8 to 14 follicles with each ovulation, and one matures to full size and ovulates and the other ones don't. But the difference between PCOS and women who don't have PCOS is that there are hormones, insulin and testosterone specifically, that are around, and high amounts of LH that further develop these ovums and make them so big and turn them into these cysts, right? So you're probably wondering, what are some symptoms of PCOS? I've just listed a few of them, but just to make it super duper clear, let's go through a few of the ones that we see within the Rotterdam criteria, that are recognized within the Rotterdam criteria. So a regular cycle or no cycle, which means you don't know when you're getting your period, you don't know when you're ovulating, you don't know if you've ovulated. Difficulty falling pregnant, and that plays into the first one, right? If you have an irregular cycle, you don't know when you're ovulating, or if you're ovulating at all, that's also going to bring into mind like some pretty significant fertility concerns, which is why it's the leading cause of infertility in the West. Excessive hair growth, so again, hair on the chin, around your belly button, around your nipples, just excess hair on, arms and legs as well. And then as well, hair thinning. So male pattern baldness. So you're growing hair in the places you don't want to grow hair, and then it's thinning and falling out, and you're getting bald in the places where you do want to have hair, which is really annoying. Oily skin and acne. And this is because the sebaceous glands, which are these glands in our skin, they release way more oil when testosterone is around, when androgens are around, right? So that's what's giving you the oily skin, the oily hair, and acne. Anxiety and depression are also highly correlated with PCOS. Weight gain and not being able to lose weight, and that plays into the piece around metabolism and insulin resistance, which we will be talking about, and higher amounts of PMS. And that plays into how PCOS has some pretty significant shifts and dysregulation with hormones. So what are the roots of PCOS? There are a few ones, and there's always a case for personalized nutrition when we talk about women's reproductive health. There are lots of people saying, what PCOS type are you? And I really don't like this, because it kind of just plays into that old medical field, bullshit that women, that you go to a doctor and they're trying to put you into a box so they know what medication to give you. I feel like that's just kind of the same vibe. I feel that as a practitioner and as individuals, we need to be seeing ourselves and other people as, a case that we've never seen before, and, a constitution that is in of itself unique. There are going to be some similarities, but saying what PCOS type are, oh, you're thin PCOS type, that means that you have this and this, that's not necessarily true. And I feel like that might actually be harmful. And it is unfortunate that most of the free resources around PCOS kind of follow this PCOS type. And I really just don't believe in it. I believe in getting your labs done and working closely with a practitioner and just finding out what your constitution is exactly, so you know how to move forward. So with that being said, what are the roots of PCOS? So the roots of PCOS, a lot of the time we're seeing insulin resistance and blood sugar regulation problems. We're almost always going to see some form of inflammation in the gut. 80% of our immune system is in the gut. When we're talking about inflammation, we're talking about the immune system. So we're talking about gut inflammation. We're also looking at your adrenals. So your adrenals tend to pump out a lot more cortisol and just generally more stress hormones. So all impact one another to some degree. So the beauty of our body is that it's so interconnected, and what makes it so robust is that if one system is out, it can throw others out too. So that's the beauty and the curse of our body systems, right? Is that, say you have really bad gut inflammation, that's not just going to stay isolated in the body, especially with PCOS. It's going to impact your adrenal glands. It's also going to impact your insulin resistance, which means it's going to impact your hormones release, which means it's going to release, change how your hypothalamus is communicating with your ovaries. Everything is interconnected, which is what makes it so robust. But this is also what makes it a bit problematic because you can't ever have one system in isolation. And before we continue, I would like to just say that at the roots of PCOS, it is either it's a stress response as a root. Very often this is what I see, is that there is a stress response as a root, or it's insulin resistance at a root. And I see a lot of people saying it's one or the other, or it's all of them, or it's none of them. And that's just not true. Again, everyone is individual and you need to find out exactly what's going on for you. So let's go one by one and talk about insulin resistance, blood sugar regulation, some gut inflammation, and some adrenal fatigue / the adrenal component of PCOS. So insulin resistance and blood sugar regulation. So most women with PCOS will have some insulin resistance and blood glucose dysregulation to some degree. And so that's where, in like 50% to 60% of cases, this is the truth. It's very rare to find a woman with PCOS that doesn't have high insulin. And there are a few different reasons why. It could be because, our Western diet is so carb heavy, and that makes our cells resistant to insulin. And just so to back up, you're probably wondering, what is insulin? What is insulin resistance and blood sugar regulation? So when you eat something, say you have a banana, you eat a banana that goes into your digestive system, it signals to an organ in your digestive system called the pancreas to release a hormone called insulin. And insulin goes into your blood system, and it basically tells all the cells in your body, hey, there's around, there's this X many carbohydrates, because we've just been told by the digestive system there's going to be some glucose in the blood system soon. I'm going to latch onto your receptor so you can open up a glucose channel, so you can allow this glucose into your cells so you can use it for energy. And if we already have enough energy and we don't need it, we can store this glucose as fat, which is an ingenious situation. And we really love insulin. We love the pancreas. But what can happen in the West, and also what can happen when we have a high stress situation or a highly stressful woman, is that this system can be, can be really pushed out of whack. So say you're eating a really carb heavy meal. So, every single meal that you're eating is filled with refined carbohydrates, so not complex, which means that your body doesn't really have to work that hard to break them down. You are going to be consistently releasing so much insulin all of the time. And it gets to a point where your cells take away the reception sites for insulin, and this is where we're talking about insulin resistance. Your cells have taken away the receptor site for insulin to kind of lock into, to open up that glucose channel, which means what? That when you eat a meal, if you have insulin resistance, which means your cells don't want any more glucose in their cell structure because they already have enough, insulin keeps on increasing in the blood system, and so does your glucose, because it has nowhere to go. So what happens next? It gets stored as fat. And so this is where women with PCOS sometimes can have that problem of they just cannot lose weight no matter what they do, because our modern system and how we teach people to eat doesn't actually line up with PCOS. PCOS to a certain degree is a metabolic disease that impacts the reproductive system and not the other way around. Insulin resistance also impairs ovarian function, and this is actually what increases testosterone. So insulin, when it increases to a certain set point, impacts your ovarian reserve and how our ovaries are producing different hormones. And so estrogen is a precursor for testosterone. And when we have high insulin, we convert this estrogen into testosterone really quickly, especially in the ovaries, and we keep producing high amounts of androgens. And so this, insulin resistance, whenever we see insulin resistance, I'm almost always going to be looking, at least in my clinic, for high androgens as well, because those two factors seem to come hand in hand. They very rarely do we see them occurring separately, especially in PCOS. The other thing that we'd want to talk about and know about is gut inflammation. So research shows us that women with PCOS have significantly depleted gut bacteria, which means most women with PCOS tend to have more sensitive and even, really reactive digestive systems. And just to back up again, in your gut, so in your large intestine, you have more cells there than you do in your entire body. And it is quite diverse, right? So it's mostly, we talk about the gut microbiome. It's mostly bacteria, but there's also some virus and some yeast in there as well. And to some degree, there are little bits of fungi in there as well. It's a microbiome. It's like its own ecosystem in of itself, and it outnumbers us trillions to one. There are way more cells in our microbiome than we have in our own bodies. And because there's so many different types of bacteria, yeast, fungi, and virus, we also have more genetic diversity in this area of our body. And so generally, when we think about the gut microbiome, there's two factors to a healthy gut microbiome. We want there to be a huge diversity of gut microbiota. We want it to be balanced, so we have more beneficial gut microbiome than we have, pathogenic or problematic gut microbiome. And we also want to make sure that it's reflective in our environment. So when we're eating an apple, you're not just eating the apple, you're eating the microbiome that is on that apple and in that apple as well, which communicates with your environment, with your internal environment, which basically tells your immune system, tells your gut system, hey, this is where we are. This is the type of nutrient profile I am. This is, it just helps you digest food, I think, more effectively. And that's kind of another argument I usually make for eating locally, is because your inner and outer worlds kind of need to match each other, especially when we're talking about gut health. And I just think it is really quite romantic and beautiful that we have this conversation happening with our outer greater world and our inner world as well. So when we have less diversity, it means that we have less capability of being able to digest food effectively. And it usually means that we have a pretty reactive gut system. And so when we're talking about the gut, because we have such a huge amount of flora here, we also have 80% of our immune system here. So our immune system lines the internal lining of our gut. And when we're talking about inflammation, we're talking about the immune system, right? Because inflammation is something that our immune system does to protect us. It's an immune system function. And 80% of our gut, 80% of our immune system resides in the gut. So our white blood cells reside in the gut. So this is what's giving us quite a reactive digestive system. So high cortisol also puts women with PCOS into a sympathetic response, like fight or flight, which causes vasoconstriction of blood vessels in our digestive system and vasodilation in our arms and legs, which means that we aren't getting enough blood circulation in the gut, which means we're not digesting food effectively enough, which means that we have nutrient deficiencies as well. And so this is where it gets a bit confusing. I'm trying to look at insulin resistance, blood sugar regulation, gut inflammation, and also adrenal fatigue and adrenal component of PCOS separately. But you can't really look at any of these systems in isolation. They're all so interconnected. And so when we have high cortisol from our adrenal glands, this is also going to impact insulin resistance, right? It's going to increase insulin even more, which is going to increase our ovaries' ability to produce androgens, which makes our systems, which makes all of our symptoms worse. And it can also play into gut inflammation as well. So also, if you're not getting your period, so women who have irregular cycles, right? If you're not getting your period and you're not ovulating, and therefore maybe you're not getting your period, sometimes you can have a period when you don't ovulate. What can happen is women who aren't getting their periods will be holding on to a lot more iron, as our periods are a way that our body gets rid of excess iron. And women already absorb so much more iron and absorb it way more effectively and efficiently in comparison with men. So when we have iron accumulation, it can sometimes store excess iron in its free form, so it's not bound to an enzyme in the gut. And this is really quite dangerous for gut health, because pathogenic species of microbiome flora can feed on this iron and proliferate and grow and cause other problems like IBS, constipation, diarrhea. It can also play into things like SIBO, and this can exacerbate and cause gut hypermobility or leaky gut. So we've thrown this around a lot, I think, in the health field a lot. Leaky gut, but I don't think a lot of people understand what it means, so I just want to explain that really quickly. When we're talking about gut hypermobility or leaky gut, what we're talking about is the gut cells that separate the gut lining and our digestive system from the inside pelvic cavity, and it's millions of different blood vessels that surround this area, so we can absorb those nutrients and take it to the cells so we can use it and be really healthy human beings. These cells have these tight junctions. It's almost like if you could put your hands in front of you, spread out your fingers, and then kind of link your fingers in with one another with your palms facing out. Imagine your palm is like the cell, but your fingers are almost like these, it's almost like these Velcro-like microscopic fingers, and they all link into one another and they grip really, really, really tightly. And they only open and loosen when there's a molecule that's too big to pass through the cell and its cell lining to get through to the blood vessels. So sometimes they open, very rarely, but most of the time they're tight, shut, close. But if we create a bit of loosening in our fingers and a loosening in this area because we have so much gut inflammation, and say we haven't been getting our periods, so we have iron accumulation, which is feeding pathogenic species of microbiota in our gut, this is going to cause inflammation, and this is going to cause leaky gut, which means that molecules of food, digested food, and also parts of our microbiome can get through these cells, the tight junctions of our cells, and get into the pelvic area, which can cause problems as well. And so I think Aristotle or Socrates, I don't know, some Greek philosopher said that all illness resides in the gut, and the reason why is because our immune system resides there, and the baseline of most disease is inflammation, and this could not be more true for women with PCOS. Generally in PCOS, that's something that I just see as a baseline. Very often it's just there's high inflammation markers, and if you wanted to go and get your labs done, go and get your labs done looking at C-reactive protein or CRP and oxidative stress, and that's going to be able to show you how much inflammation is in the body, and that could be a good metric for if you have leaky gut or not, which we can talk about later in this episode, a few things that you can do to help your leaky gut. But for now, eggs are really amazing because they're really rich in choline. Also, eating foods that are rich in gelatin and collagen is also really great. So bone broth is really amazing for healing the gut, and also fermented foods. But if you have bloating, if you feel like you have some pretty bad gut inflammation, eating yeasty foods is not going to be good for you, because generally that's one of the pathogenic microbiome floras that tend to feed on iron. So, your artisan sourdough organic bread and your kombuchas, which are both pretty rich in yeast, you want to be staying away from. So opt for your kimchis, your water kefir, your coconut kefir. Those things would really help you to decrease your hypermobility and decrease your leaky gut, while also increasing your gut microbiome diversity, which decreases inflammation as well. And so I just spoke about how cortisol can impact our blood, right? And how it's vasoconstricted in the gut area, which can exacerbate gut inflammation and gut problems. And so when we're talking about cortisol and stress hormones, we're talking about the adrenals. And the adrenals are these two endocrine glands that live on top of your kidneys. And a lot of people kind of, when they say, oh, my kidneys, or oh, my adrenal glands, they put their fingers pretty far down their spine, but it's, your kidneys actually live just behind your liver. They're partially a part of our digestive system and are, mostly our excretory system. So the adrenal glands are located above the kidneys, and they're responsible for secreting hormones such as cortisol, aldosterone, and adrenaline. So cortisol is often referred to as the stress hormone, and it helps regulate metabolism, blood sugar levels, and immune responses. So we need cortisol around. We need cortisol to a certain degree, but in women with PCOS, the adrenal glands tend to overproduce cortisol and exacerbate hormonal imbalances. So cortisol dysregulation in PCOS can lead to pretty heightened hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis response. So this HPA axis is your hypothalamus is talking to your pituitary gland, which is talking to your adrenals. And so this, when we have high cortisol dysregulation, which means we have chronically high levels of cortisol in the system, which, backing up, whenever we have inflammation in the gut, we are almost always going to have cortisol, because cortisol is associated with the immune system. It's a part of the immune system. It's made to create inflammation and create space so your body can figure out what's going on and fix the problem. But with PCOS, because it's, all of these systems are kind of working for each other to keep each other afloat and survive, but it's kind of driving itself further and further and further into a deeper hole. So cortisol dysregulation heightens this HPA axis response, which means that the body stays in a prolonged fight or flight state. So this chronic elevation of cortisol increases glucose production and inhibits insulin receptor sensitivity as well. So you can see now how all of these things are connected. When we have high cortisol, it also decreases insulin receptor sensitivity. So it's causing insulin resistance as well. And this creates this vicious cycle that continues to prolong and exacerbate insulin resistance, gut inflammation. So the adrenals keep producing more cortisol. So high cortisol levels are associated with downregulation of insulin receptors, particularly in muscle and liver cells, reducing their ability to absorb glucose. So you could be eating super healthy, but what's happening is you have high cortisol, which is turning off these insulin receptors. You already, maybe previously, someone had been eating a fairly unhealthy diet, which has also exacerbated this problem. And, your cells are already resistant to insulin. The high insulin and the high cortisol are impacting your ovaries. So they're producing more testosterone, which means you're not ovulating, which makes the problem even worse, right? So this insulin resistance increases circulating insulin further, which produces more testosterone, as I said before, which means that we're getting worse symptoms. So anovulation, hirsutism, and weight gain. So chronic stress-induced cortisol elevation can also upregulate adrenal androgen production. So which means that not only are we producing androgens in the ovaries now, we're also starting to see that our adrenals are producing androgens as well. So there's also another point in here that I want to say is that women with PCOS are far more likely to have suffered from a really stressful or traumatic childhood, which can set your adrenal glands already at a higher set point to produce more of these stress hormones, right? There's also another piece in here I'd like to say, that a lot of women with PCOS are on the autism spectrum or the ADHD spectrum. And so that's another part that the scientific community is just finding out about now. It's something that women with PCOS have been talking about forever. And that's a really interesting field of research if you wanted to go into that as well. There's also a connection with our thyroid. So up to 25% of women with PCOS have undiagnosed hypothyroidism. And hypothyroidism is basically when our thyroid, which is a butterfly-shaped gland in our throat, which releases hormones, T3, T4, and is, those are produced in response from a hypothalamus and pituitary gland releasing TSH. And what it basically does is it sets the metabolism and the speed of the body, which also means that we set the warmth of the body as well. So hypothyroidism, hypo is so low thyroid hormones. Hypothyroidism is abnormally low activity of the thyroid gland. So we're not producing enough T3 and T4. And so those are the primary hormones that you just need to remember when we're talking about the thyroid gland. So the thyroid gland will produce T3 and T4. T4 is an inactive form of thyroid hormone and T3 is the active form of thyroid hormone. So even if you get your labs back but you don't, differentiate between T3, T4 and you go, my labs are fine, but you might have way more T4 than you have T3. So there are so many different elements to hypothyroidism. I don't have time to go into it today. There's also another thing to say here is that 90% of the cases where women have hypothyroidism, they have an autoimmune condition called Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So those are a few things to look into. So if you were going to go and get, labs to do with PCOS, you almost always have to look at your thyroid hormones. So TSH, T3 and T4, and also looking at your, your anti-TPO hormones, or not hormones, anti-TPO antibodies as well, just to check for any possible autoimmune rootness within your configuration of PCOS. So the thyroid gland sets the pace of not only our metabolism of our entire body, but hypothyroidism, in the cases of hypothyroidism, we have a sluggish or slow metabolism, because thyroid gland isn't producing enough thyroid hormones, which means we aren't able to metabolize things effectively, which means that, again, this worsens the weight gain component of PCOS if you have low thyroid hormones, because you have high insulin, you have insulin resistance, you have lots of glucose in the blood, which is being stored as fat. And then you also have low thyroid hormones. So, those are hormones that go onto the receptor sites of our cells and tell them, hey, open up, there's energy around. We want to increase the metabolism so we can burn energy, so we can build the body, so we can heal. In women with low thyroid hormones and PCOS, this is just the case where you have chronic fatigue. You're eating more than enough food, but you just can't keep gaining weight. No matter how many times you go to the gym, how many runs you go, no matter how long you're in a calorie deficit, because it's a hormone problem. And that kind of leads into the PCOS myth. So these two PCOS myths, there's a few PCOS myths, but I just want to touch on two of them. The first one is hormonal birth control can cause PCOS, and the second one is just move more and eat less. And maybe we should just touch on that second one around losing weight, just because we've been talking about the thyroid gland. So PCOS myth number one, just lose weight. I think a lot of women have had this story where they've gone to a nutritionist or a dietitian or even a doctor and said, whatever I do, I cannot lose this fucking weight. I've tried everything. And they're like, just move more and eat less. So many women have been simply told to eat less and move more. And I just want to take a moment to break down why this doesn't work for women, especially with PCOS. So under eating and over exercise increases stress on the body, which means we're increasing the cortisol, which makes all of those systems we've just spoken about more likely to be aggravated. So high cortisol is common with women in PCOS, and it tends to proliferate more fat cells and adipose tissue around the stomach, which makes perfect sense, right? Because cortisol is a stress hormone. Your body thinks it's in danger. It doesn't understand what's going on. It's just reacting hormonally to what's going on day by day. And if you have high amounts of cortisol and you have this belly fat you can't get rid of, that's what's going on, is that no matter if you keep exercising and doing these high intensity interval training, if you do all of this calorie deficit dieting, you're just going to increase your cortisol more, which is going to cause more insulin resistance, which is going to cause more fat being stored around your stomach area, because this is where your vital organs are and your body is just trying to survive. In the times where it cannot survive, or in times where your body cannot thrive, it's just going to survive. And so that's what's happening with this whole PCOS situation. And so this is why so many women who haven't been diagnosed with PCOS, who have been diagnosed with PCOS, have had eating disorders, right? So this calories in, calories out model, we really need to throw this to the side, especially when we're talking about women's bodies. There is something to say about it. Like, if you didn't eat for 30 days, would you lose weight? Yes. But would your cortisol be through the roof? Yes. Would it be really hard? Yes. There is an element to, I teach women with PCOS how to fast, but it's a very careful, slow process, because we need to make sure we're not exacerbating any excess cortisol response from the adrenal glands. The second one is hormonal birth control can cause PCOS. And I'm so sick of hearing this shit. I'm so sick of seeing blog posts from people saying, do you have post-pill PCOS? It's such bullshit. Well, to a certain degree, so can hormonal birth control cause PCOS? Yes, and mostly no, right? So hormonal birth control can cause high androgens in the short term when women discontinue hormonal birth control, right? So this can lead to acne, oily hair, and perhaps even some hair loss and hair growth. But it'll never go as far as to cause PCOS. You might have symptoms of PCOS. You might be, going through anovulatory cycles, but very often women who are discontinuing hormonal birth control, it will take, 2 to 3 months for them to ovulate and have regular cycles again. So if you've just gotten off hormonal birth control and you're like, oh my gosh, I have acne. Oh my gosh, I have all of this excess hair loss. My hair is thinning. No, girl, just wait. There are so many different impacts that hormonal birth control has on our body. It can decrease, it causes huge decreases in our nutrients, so huge depletions in nutrient stores, which can play into, thyroidism. So Crohn's disease is increased by 300% when women have been on hormonal birth control for long periods of time, which means it's going to be impacting your thyroid. Your thyroid is really important for hair growth. So no. I've seen a lot of information about this and the symptoms for, post-hormonal birth control syndrome, which is, a syndrome that women experience when they are healing after hormonal birth control, can be very similar to PCOS. But PCOS cannot cause, hormonal birth control cannot ever cause PCOS, ever, ever, ever. So another point in this, can hormonal birth control cause PCOS case, is if a woman goes on hormonal birth control before she has a chance to learn about, know what her normal is, she might have already had PCOS, right? Especially in the cases where a woman goes on hormonal birth control because she has irregular cycles. So say you go to the doctor's office and you're going, okay, I never know when I'm going to get a period. I never know when I'm ovulating. I want to go on the pill because I've heard it regulates your cycles, and that's something doctors say all the time. Just go on the pill, it regulates your cycles, which is complete BS, but that's a whole other conversation. So say you went on hormonal birth control super young because you had irregular cycles. You might have had PCOS that wasn't diagnosed. So the chances of a woman being diagnosed with PCOS later in her life, if she had cystic acne around her chin or excess hair growth, is around 60 to 70%. So if you're giving up hormonal birth control and you're like, oh my gosh, hormonal birth control gave me PCOS, girl, no. In this case, hormonal birth control can cover up PCOS. It's mostly women who present at their doctor's office when they have been diagnosed with PCOS. They're either given metformin, Ozempic, or they're given hormonal birth control, right? And so the reason why they're given hormonal birth control is because it can cover up all of these symptoms and kind of press pause on PCOS. So in 99% of cases, PCOS is not caused by hormonal birth control, but it covers up its symptoms. So just to round out this podcast, I just wanted to talk really quickly about some solutions if you have PCOS. So first one is diet. So diet plays a huge part, especially if you have insulin resistance. So say you get your labs back and you have insulin resistance, which is high insulin, high glucose, and you're not losing weight. If you also do a thyroid panel and you're producing more than enough T3 and T4 and your thyroid looks healthy, then I would highly recommend going ahead and doing a lower carbohydrate, moderate protein, and high fat diet. It doesn't work for everyone, and that's where, doing your labs and working with a practitioner is really, really important. I think the PCOS diet, of eating low carb is just sold to every woman with PCOS. Some people will say it doesn't work at all, I never recommend it. Some people will say I recommend it to everyone. And of course, I'm in the middle. I never say there is this one rule for everyone. It just is case by case. So if you have high insulin, high glucose in the blood, and this, you've done those fasting glucose and fasting insulin tests, and you've also done T3, T4, and TPO, and we've ruled out hypothyroidism, go ahead and do this diet. So eating lower amounts of carbohydrates decrease the insulin spike that you experience after eating. And it actually allows your body to use that excess fat that was previously carbohydrate that you converted to fat and stored in fat tissue. We can actually start using this for energy. And this in time decreases insulin resistance. So this in turn will also decrease androgen production in the ovaries and the adrenal glands as well, which leads to successful ovulation. And therefore now we're ovulating, we're producing progesterone, which means estrogen comes down, which means when estrogen comes down to a healthy level, we're not converting it into testosterone, which means your hirsutism and your hair loss and your acne goes away, right? Just to start out, instead of going ahead and doing a really hectic low carbohydrate diet, just to start out, just focus on low glycemic index foods. So you can look this up online, high versus low and then moderate glycemic index foods. So all foods have a glycemic index. And so the higher glycemic index foods have a higher insulin response, and low glycemic foods have the lowest insulin response. So you want to be eating the foods that are in the low glycemic index area or section. And that's really easy to look up. There are lots of beautiful charts online which can help you with shopping. There's lots of amazing recipes that you can find online for free that are low glycemic foods as well. So if you focus on this and eating high fiber as well, this can decrease and blunt your insulin response. Also, eating food that has vinegar, so vinaigrette dressings and, drinking apple cider vinegar with a straw so you don't ruin the enamel on your teeth. The acetic acid that's in vinegars decreases and blunts the insulin response by 20 to 30%. Fiber also blunts the response of insulin by 20 to 30% as well. So if you're eating low glycemic foods and you're also eating vinegary foods, or you have apple cider vinegar in your water bottle throughout the day, and you're eating high fiber, which most low glycemic foods are high in fiber, you're winning. It doesn't need to be complicated. It can be really simple. That's generally what I tell women to do. So you can also start with berberine. So berberine is kind of like nature's metformin. So, I mean, part of the compounds of metformin were formed from berberine, which is a natural compound. And this decreases and blunts the insulin response as well. So you can take up to 1,500 milligrams of that a day, and you can have it between or before, 15 minutes before your food. So it decreases the insulin response. It basically just decreases your pancreas from releasing a huge amount of insulin, which means you're actually going to be burning this energy because it's going to be higher in fat, moderate protein, low in carbohydrate, and you won't be storing it as fat. Berberine does have some negative side effects though with digestive system. So if you're getting any cramping, IBS, diarrhea, constipation, just back off the berberine and just maybe only take it once or twice a day. So for some women focusing on a lower carbohydrate diet, it will be a short-term fix to kind of reset our metabolism, because we want a flexible metabolism, and only 12% of people in Western nations have a flexible metabolism, which means our mitochondria, which are these tiny little, organelles in our cells, which burn energy and turn it into ATP, which is the way that, that's kind of the energy currency in the body. It turns fat, and it can turn protein into ATP, which your body doesn't really like doing, but it mainly uses fat and carbohydrate. And so we want our metabolic systems and our mitochondria to be able to go 1 minute I can burn fat and 1 minute I can burn carbohydrate. But in cases where we have really high insulin sensitivity and resistance and high blood sugar, we almost always see that our metabolism is shifted towards burning carbohydrates and not fat, which is why we can't burn the fat in our cells. So, doing a lower carbohydrate diet for 2 to 3 months and then trying to work in maybe higher glycemic index foods into the diet to see how you go. If you have quite a lot of weight to lose, then you could stay on a low glycemic index or lower carbohydrate diet for 6 months, maybe check in with a practitioner or a doctor and see how you're going, and then continue until you see fit. You don't want to stay on a low carb diet for too long, because carbohydrates are really amazing for supporting progesterone production. They're really great for our gut microbiome. We need carbohydrates, you know what I mean? Food is medicine, and diet is a great treatment, and low carbohydrate diets can be really magical for women with PCOS, but they just need to be done properly and, with guidance from someone who knows what they're talking about. Another thing is strength training. So resistance strength training improves your body's ability to use insulin. So it reduces insulin resistance, and it also puts excess testosterone to work so we can build muscle. And muscle burns more energy, making it an amazing weight loss tool. So exercise, specifically strength training, acts as a probiotic, which means it increases the diversity and proliferation of our gut microbiome flora. And it's just amazing. It feels really great. I always go to the gym. I go to the gym maybe 6 days a week and have like a day off between, I think if you were going to start going to the gym, you can steal my formula, which is so easy. Just go in one day and do upper body, then do abs, and then do legs, and then take a day off. There's also, cardio is really great as well. So we want to be doing low intensity cardio, especially with PCOS, especially if you have high cortisol, because high intensity interval training and doing really intense exercises is going to exacerbate cortisol, which is really counterintuitive. You're doing this amazing exercise, you're going to this high intensity interval training, you're doing your F45 or whatever the fuck you're going to do. You're doing your Kayla Idzanas, but you keep leaning weight. And the reason why is because these exercises boost cortisol, which means it decreases your capability to burn fat for energy, right? So walking and resistance training are going to be your best friends. Walking reduces high cortisol as well. So if you can do it in the morning, go outside, get sun in your eyes so you can reset your cortisol cycle, because we usually want cortisol to peak in the morning as we're waking up and gradually trough as the day goes on, right? And so when we do this, we reset our cortisol cycle. So it peaks in the morning and it goes down at night. Low intensity cardio is really great to strengthen our cardiovascular system, and it helps our nervous system regulate towards more of a parasympathetic, which is your kind of rest and digest configuration as well. Alongside this is eating enough protein. And I'm sorry if you've heard me say this so much. I say this across all of my platforms, on my YouTube, on my TikTok, on my website. I say it in every single one of my consultations. Are you eating enough protein? Because very often women are never eating enough protein. So all women, especially women who have PCOS, should be focusing on eating enough protein. And the reason why is because studies have shown that even when a woman increases their protein intake, despite being in a calorie surplus, so you're eating more than you're burning, there's no weight gain, right? And also because if you have high testosterone around and you're going to be doing all of this weight training, what happens when you're weight training is that we're basically tearing muscles apart. And how your muscles grow is these muscle tears are filled in with new muscle tissue, and its backbone is protein. So if you're doing all this amazing exercise, but you're not eating enough protein, well, what's the fucking point? Like you're wasting your money going to these workout classes, you're wasting your time and efforts. You need to be supporting your body, right? So 30 to 40 grams of protein with every single meal. If you're on the spectrum, you need 50 grams of protein in your first meal to support dopamine and serotonin production. I'm an ADHD girly. I get 50 grams of protein with every meal, with my first meal, I should say, and around 30 to 40 during the remainder. So you should be aiming for at least 90 grams of protein a day, up to 120 to 140, maxing out at 140. Of course, it depends on how much muscle structure you are, how much activity you're doing. A really great platform I recommend is Cronometer, Cronometer. It's an app and it's also online, and you can kind of just put in your foods there. And it's also great to track your macronutrients, so your carbohydrates, your fats, and your protein, to make sure you're eating enough every single day. Some supplements just to finish off as well that I think just help most women with PCOS. So magnesium glycinate. If you have any type of constipation, magnesium citrate is really great. Girl, do you know you have 30 minutes? If you have magnesium citrate in the morning, you need to be near a loo or a toilet, because it makes you go. But I really love magnesium glycinate. It really helps to lower the insulin resistance and it reduces inflammation. So 2 major concerns for PCOS are these two. So magnesium glycinate is really great. It also supports restful sleep and calms the nervous system, aiding in hormone balance. So if you're an anxious girly, if you're a depressed girly and you have PCOS girly, magnesium glycinate is amazing, especially if you have poor sleep. This is something I see a lot in my clinic with women who have PCOS, is that they just can't sleep. And I think that's just where the cortisol, response comes in. Magnesium glycinate also lowers cortisol. So I really love that. 300 to 400 milligrams a day should do it. There's also saw palmetto. So this is known for reducing excess androgens, specifically testosterone and DHT, which can alleviate symptoms like acne, hirsutism, hair loss, and in women with PCOS. So I generally recommend 3500, so 3,500 milligrams per day. Another one is omega-3s. Omega-3s are so anti-inflammatory. They're amazing for insulin sensitivity. They're incredible for heart health and regulating hormonal imbalances as well. Aim for around 3,000 milligrams a day. You can get this from fatty fish like salmon, mackerel, and sardines, or you can supplement with it. Another one is vitamin D. 85% of women with PCOS have low vitamin D. So this is really crucial for hormone regulation. It also improves insulin sensitivity and it reduces inflammation too. So we need to be making sure you're getting enough. You can take up to 5,000 IUs a day. I take that through cod liver oil. Again, you can get this from food. You're mostly going to find it in animal-based products and mushrooms as well. Okay, hopefully this was a nice, helpful introduction to PCOS. If you're new to this, if you've been recently diagnosed, if you're thinking about being diagnosed, hopefully this has helped you. For the women who have been diagnosed, I have amazing resources for you. I have the PCOS symptom solution chart, which is 16 common symptoms that women find and then 3 solutions for each. So say for acne, it has a micronutrient that you can supplement with, foods that nutrient is really rich in, so you can find it in food sources as well, and a herb that you can use. So acne is saw palmetto, some foods, and some micronutrients that you can focus on. There's also the PCOS masterclass. If you're a visual learner and you want to learn about how PCOS acts in the body and why you're not ovulating and what, the physiological and anatomical reasons as to why PCOS and how it functions in the body. That's there for you. That's on my website. And there's also the PCOS book, which is, if you wanted to get the most bang for your buck, definitely go for the book. You can buy it on my website as an ebook, or you can buy it on Amazon as a hardcover. It's got everything you need to know how PCOS impacts your vaginal microbiome, what supplements to take, what herbs to take, what diet to do, what macronutrient distribution is the most effective. There's also 40 recipes and all of the references in that book that you could ever need. So if you wanted to learn how to heal your PCOS naturally, then definitely go for that. Anyways, thanks so much for listening to this podcast. I really hope that this was able to help you in some way, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day, whether it's your morning, midday, afternoon, evening. Thanks.